I never thought my marriage would come down to this, a single book tucked away in the corner of my wife's closet. It wasn't hidden well, just casually shoved behind some old shoe boxes. The title hit me like a punch to the gut. How to cheat on your partner safely and not get caught. At first, I froze. Was this a joke? Some kind of prank? But as I flipped through the pages, I realized it wasn't a joke at all. Detailed instructions, strategies, even checklists, it was all there. My stomach turned as I realized my wife, the woman I trusted with everything, had been following this manual step by step. It wasn't just the title that unsettled me, it was how methodical it all was. The first few pages were written like some twisted guidebook, laying out the devious and devious of infidelity. Rules like never use your real name when meeting someone new and always have an alibi prepared. Before every meetup, I skimmed through more sections, and each paragraph felt like a stab to the chest. There were tips about deleting messages, using secret apps to hide conversations, and even a section on how to emotionally manipulate your partner into ignoring their suspicions. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the book trembling in my hands as I read through the chapter titled How to Gaslight Effectively. It outlined ways to make your partner feel paranoid if they ever started asking questions. I could feel my pulse in my ears, a faint ringing sound that made it hard to think. My wife was using this. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was studying how to do it like it was an exam she couldn't afford to fail. The closet still smelled faintly of her perfume, and for a brief second I almost convinced myself that this wasn't real. Maybe it wasn't her book. Maybe she bought it out of curiosity, or as some kind of twisted joke. But deep down I knew better. The casual placement, the dog-eared pages, the highlighted paragraphs, it was hers. And she had been using it. I kept flipping through the book, hoping to find anything that could explain this away. But every chapter just made things worse. There was a section titled Excuses That Always Work, listing things like I was just out with friends or you're being paranoid again. I recognized those phrases. I had heard them before, almost word for word, during our past arguments when I questioned her late nights and unexplained absences. For months, I had been gaslit into believing that I was overthinking things. I remembered the night she came home smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off, calling me insecure and clingy. I remembered how she would guard her phone like it held government secrets, always tilting the screen away from me, keeping it face down on the table. The pieces started falling into place, and it was like a floodgate had opened in my mind. The worst part was realizing how long she had been planning this. The book wasn't new, the spine was cracked, the pages slightly worn. She hadn't just picked it up yesterday, this had been going on for a while, and I had been blind to it all. I leaned back against the wall of our bedroom, the weight of it all crashing down on me at once. I wanted to confront her immediately, to shove the book in her face and demand answers. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear of hearing her admit the truth. Or maybe it was something else entirely. A voice in the back of my head told me to wait, to think this through before doing anything rash. I placed the book back in the same spot I found it, carefully arranging the shoeboxes around it to make sure it looked untouched. My hands were still shaking as I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I walked out of the closet and stood in our bedroom, looking around at the life we had built together. The framed photos on the nightstand, the matching bathrobes hanging on the door, it all felt fake now, like props on a stage set for a show I didn't even know I was starring in. I tried to recall the last time I had felt truly close to her. When was the last time we had laughed together, or spent a lazy Sunday morning just enjoying each other's company? Everything felt distant, like memories from someone else's life. As I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, I realized how trapped I felt. My marriage, my home, everything I had poured my heart into it, was all crumbling around me. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I needed to know more. I needed to understand just how far this had gone, and whether there was any chance of salvaging what was left. The sound of the front door opening jolted me back to reality. She was home. I quickly wiped my face, not realizing I had been on the verge of tears. I couldn't let her see me like this. I couldn't let her know what I had found. I walked out of the bedroom, forcing a smile as she greeted me casually, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter. She acted like everything was fine, like we were still the happy couple everyone thought we were. But I couldn't unsee that book. I couldn't unhear the words written on its pages. As I watched her move around the kitchen, chatting about her day, I realized something chilling. She was good at this. The lies, the charm, the casual ease with which she slipped into her role as the loving wife, it was all calculated. And I had been blind to it for far too long. That night, as I lay in bed beside her, I couldn't sleep. Her breathing was slow and steady, completely at ease. But my mind was racing, replaying every suspicious moment, every red flag I had ignored over the past few months. I felt like a stranger in my own home, lying next to someone I no longer recognized. I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't let this go. I couldn't pretend like I hadn't seen that book. But I also couldn't confront her without more proof. I needed to be smart about this. If she had spent months studying how to lie to me, then I needed to be just as careful in finding out the truth. As I stared at the ceiling in the dark, one thought repeated over and over in my mind: this isn't over. The next evening, I overheard her on the phone. I wasn't eavesdropping at first, just walking past our bedroom door. But her words froze me in place. She was explaining her plan to someone. She laughed as she laid it all out: how her friend just needed to show up, dance with me, and let her catch us in the act. She planned to make me look guilty, humiliate me, and then use that as an excuse to keep seeing her lover without any guilt. I couldn't believe it. The woman I'd loved and trusted for years was plotting to turn me into the villain of her story. My heart pounded, my chest ached, and for a moment I felt like collapsing right there. But then something changed in me. I wasn't going to let her play me like a fool. The moment I heard her voice, something in her tone felt off. It wasn't the usual casual small talk she had when she chatted with friends or family. It was deliberate, sharp, and almost rehearsed. I paused mid-step, hovering just out of sight near the bedroom door. My breathing slowed, and I strained to hear her words over the pounding in my ears. She was speaking in a low voice, as if she was afraid someone might overhear. The way she described her plan sent chills down my spine. Every word was laced with cruelty, every detail meticulously thought out. She wasn't just trying to escape our marriage, she was trying to destroy me in the process. She laughed lightly at something the person on the other end said, and it was the kind of laugh that used to make me smile. Now it felt sharp and hollow, like glass breaking inside my chest. Her words painted a picture so vivid that I could see it unfolding before me. Her friend would come over, act flirtatious, dance with me in a way that could easily be misinterpreted, and then right on cue she'd walk in. She'd make a scene, scream, cry, and play the devastated wife. The thought of being publicly humiliated like that, of being turned into some caricature of an unfaithful husband, made my stomach churn. But it wasn't just the humiliation that cut deep, it was her confidence. The way she spoke, it was as if she had already won. She was sure that I'd crumble under the weight of her accusations, that I'd beg and plead for her forgiveness, that I'd accept whatever scraps of dignity she decided to leave me with. The arrogance in her voice was unbearable, but it was also enlightening. I realized in that moment that she didn't see me as her partner anymore. I was just an obstacle, something to be dealt with, manipulated, and discarded. For a brief moment I felt frozen, paralyzed by the sheer weight of the betrayal. How do you process something like that? How do you stand there, knowing the person you love is planning to stab you in the back and smile while doing it? My mind raced through memories, anniversaries, vacations, lazy Sunday mornings. All of it felt like a lie now. Had she been planning this all along, even during those moments when she held my hand and said she loved me? A faint creak in the floorboard beneath me snapped me back to reality, and I quickly moved away from the door. I couldn't risk her catching me listening in. My heart was still hammering in my chest as I walked into the living room, trying to look normal, trying to act like I hadn't just heard my wife plotting my downfall. I could hear her voice faintly continuing behind the door, but I couldn't focus on the words anymore. My mind was too busy racing through possibilities, through what I needed to do next. I sat down on the couch and stared blankly at the television. The screen was dark, reflecting back a version of myself I barely recognized, a man with tired eyes, hunched shoulders, and an expression that was equal parts anger and disbelief. I felt like I was in some twisted movie, like none of this could actually be happening in real life. But it was. She came out of the bedroom a few minutes later, phone still in hand, her expression perfectly composed. She gave me a small smile as she walked past me, heading into the kitchen. I forced myself to smile back, but I could feel the muscles in my face trembling with the effort. How could she look at me so calmly after what I had just heard? How could she act like everything was fine, knowing the knife was already aimed at my back? I watched her as she poured herself a glass of water, scrolling through her phone with a faint smile playing on her lips. It made me sick. She looked so normal, so comfortable in the chaos she was creating. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to shout, to throw the book in her face, to demand answers. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. She was too confident, too sure of herself. If I acted without a plan, she'd twist the situation around and make me look like the villain before I even had a chance to explain myself. Instead, I excused myself and went to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I leaned against the sink, gripping the edge so tightly my knuckles turned white. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched, shoulders shaking slightly from the adrenaline coursing through me. I felt powerless, and that was the worst part. I had spent years building this life with her, trusting her, loving her, and now I was just another pawn in whatever sick game she was playing. But as the minutes passed, the initial shock started to fade, and something else took its place: resolve. If she thought she could set me up, humiliate me, and walk away without consequences, she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her rewrite our story to make me the villain and herself the victim. When I walked out of the bathroom, she was sitting on the couch, watching TV like nothing had happened. She looked over at me, her face calm, her smile easy. "Everything okay?" she asked casually. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just tired," I replied. But inside, I was anything but tired. My mind was sharp, focused, and ready. She had her plan, and now I needed mine. If she wanted to play this game, then fine, I'd play. But I wouldn't lose. The next day felt like walking on shattered glass. Every movement, every glance, every word between us carried an invisible weight. My wife went about her morning routine as if nothing was wrong, making coffee, checking her phone, humming softly under her breath. I watched her from across the kitchen table, studying her face, her gestures, every subtle flicker of her expression. She was good at this. Too good. If I hadn't found that book or overheard her phone call, I might have believed this facade. But now I saw everything differently. Her smile felt rehearsed, her casual laughter felt hollow, and the way she avoided eye contact for just a split second longer than usual told me she was hiding something. Every interaction between us was a performance, and I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to be the audience or her unwilling co-star. I spent most of that morning pretending. Pretending I didn't know, pretending I wasn't boiling with anger, heartbreak, and confusion. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving for an errand, and the contact felt cold, meaningless. As soon as the door shut behind her, I let out the breath I'd been holding. I needed to act. If she had a plan, I needed one too. The first thing I did was check her side of the closet again. The book was still there, tucked neatly behind the shoeboxes. I pulled it out, flipping through the pages I had already memorized. This wasn't just some guide, it was her blueprint, her strategy manual. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed proof that couldn't be twisted or denied. I checked her nightstand, her dresser, even the pockets of her jackets hanging by the door. There were no love notes, no suspicious receipts, nothing obvious. She was careful, meticulous. But no one is perfect. Her laptop sat on the desk in our shared office space, and for a moment, I hesitated. Crossing this line felt final, like stepping into a world where trust no longer existed. But trust was already gone, wasn't it? I opened the laptop, and to my surprise, it wasn't even password protected. Arrogance, perhaps, or maybe she thought I'd never have a reason to look. Her email was open, filled with the usual clutterwork notifications, newsletters, spam. But one name stood out, a name I didn't recognize. A series of back-and-forth messages revealed everything. They weren't romantic or overly emotional, they were cold, transactional, almost like two people coordinating a business deal. Dates, locations, times, it was all laid out in black and white. The messages confirmed my worst fears. She had been seeing him for months, and their next meeting was planned for the following evening, the same night she intended to set me up with her friend. My stomach twisted as I scrolled further. She had already planned her alibi, already prepared her lines for when she would confront me. It was so calculated, so heartless, that I had to close the laptop and step away just to breathe. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I grabbed my jacket and went for a walk, hoping the cold air would clear my head. But no amount of fresh air could erase the image of those emails from my mind. Every word felt like a knife twisting deeper into an already open wound. As I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, I tried to piece together my next steps. Confronting her now would be pointless. She'd deny everything, twist my words, and somehow make herself the victim. I had to let her think her plan was still intact. I had to let her believe she was in control. By the time I returned home, the sun was beginning to set, and she was already back. She greeted me with that same easy smile, asking about my day, as if nothing had changed. I played along, nodding, smiling, keeping my voice calm and steady. But every second I spent in her presence felt like an act of war, silent, invisible, but deeply personal. That night I barely slept. I lay next to her, staring at the ceiling while she slept soundly beside me. How could she sleep so peacefully knowing what she was planning? How could she breathe so evenly while standing on the edge of such a cruel betrayal? I thought about all the moments we had shared over the years, the good ones, the bad ones, the quiet ones in between. Were any of them real to her? Did she ever truly love me, or had I just been convenient until something better came along? The weight of those questions pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Morning came too soon, and with it, the final act of her plan drew closer. She was cheerful at breakfast, almost giddy. She told me she'd be going out later in the evening to meet some friends and not to wait up for her. I nodded, my face a mask of indifference, while inside every nerve in my body was screaming. After she left, I began setting my own plan into motion. I called a friend, someone I trusted completely, and asked for their help. I explained everything, sparing no details, and together we devised a counter-strategy. I wasn't going to let her blindside me, not this time. The hours crept by painfully slow. Every tick of the clock felt deafening. Every passing minute brought me closer to the moment of confrontation. I went over my plan again and again, making sure I had every detail accounted for. If she wanted to play games, fine, but I was going to win. By the time evening arrived, the house felt suffocating. I could barely look at her as she got ready to leave, dressed in a casual yet carefully chosen outfit. She kissed me on the cheek and told me not to wait up. I forced a smile and nodded, watching her walk out the door with a confidence that made my blood boil. The moment she was gone, I moved quickly. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. I had everything ready, proof, witnesses, and an airtight plan to expose her for exactly what she was. She thought she had me cornered, thought she had me figured out. But she underestimated me, and by the time this night was over, the roles would be reversed, and she would be the one left scrambling in the wreckage of her own lies. That evening, the weight of what was about to unfold sat heavy in my chest. I paced the living room, glancing at the clock every few minutes as if it would make time move faster. My hands felt cold, my breath shallow. It wasn't fear, it was the sharp edge of anticipation mixed with anger that hadn't dulled since the moment I overheard her plan. Tonight, everything would be laid bare, and I was ready to watch her carefully constructed illusion crumble into dust. I had spent the day ensuring every detail of my counterplan was airtight. My friend, someone I trusted without question, was positioned nearby, ready to step in if things went sideways. I had also taken precautions to document everything: the emails, the book, the phone call I'd partially recorded the night I overheard her. Every piece of evidence was neatly tucked away, ready to be used if she tried to twist the narrative. As the time drew closer, I sat on the couch, the silence in the house pressing down on me. My mind raced with images of what was about to happen. Her friend, whoever she was, would arrive soon, following my wife's instructions to the letter. The thought of being part of their game, of being used as some pawn in her cruel little scheme, made my stomach turn, but that disgust was quickly replaced by determination. I wasn't going to let her win. When the knock finally came, it echoed through the empty space around me. I stood slowly, my heart hammering in my chest as I approached the door. On the other side stood a woman I'd never seen before, polished, confident, and wearing a dress that felt deliberately provocative. She smiled at me, but it wasn't warm, it was calculated, almost mechanical. "Hey," she said casually, "your wife said I could stop by." I stepped aside, letting her in. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken tension as she walked past me and into the living room. She turned to face me, her expression somewhere between playful and expectant, as if she was waiting for me to make the first move. But I didn't. I simply sat down on the couch, my eyes locked on hers. She hesitated for a moment, her confidence faltering slightly as the silence stretched between us. I could tell she wasn't expecting this reaction. According to the script my wife had given her, I was supposed to fall into the trap, flirt back, play into the act, give them the ammunition they needed to destroy me. Instead, I leaned back, crossed my arms, and said calmly, "You can tell her it's not going to work." Her face shifted slightly, confusion flickering in her eyes. I don't know what you mean." "You know exactly what I mean," I replied, my voice steady. "You're here to play a role in her little show, aren't you? Dance with me, make it look convincing, and wait for her to walk in and cause a scene. But it's not happening." For a moment she said nothing. Then her confident mask cracked just enough for me to see the hesitation underneath. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about." I held up my phone, pressing play on the recording I'd made of my wife's phone call. Her voice filled the room, clear and undeniable, spelling out every detail of their plan. The woman's face went pale as the recording ended. "I don't know what she promised you," I said, "but whatever it was, it's not worth being part of this mess." She shifted uncomfortably, clutching her purse tightly. "I didn't sign up for this," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then leave," I said simply. "Get out before she gets here." She hesitated for only a moment before turning on her heel and walking out the door, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she went. I closed the door behind her and exhaled slowly. The first domino had fallen. But it wasn't over yet. My wife would arrive soon, expecting to see me caught in the act, guilt written all over my face. Instead, she'd find something entirely different, a carefully laid trap of my own. I positioned myself in the living room, making sure everything was exactly as it had been when her friend arrived. I didn't want to give her any reason to suspect that I'd caught onto her plan. Every second felt like an eternity as I waited for the sound of her keys in the door. When the door finally swung open, she entered with the confidence of someone who believed they had already won. She paused in the doorway, scanning the room with an exaggerated expression of shock, as if she were walking onto a stage for her big performance. But there was no scene to catch, no incriminating evidence, no damning visuals. Just me sitting calmly on the couch, waiting for her. Her expression faltered as her eyes darted around the room. "Where is she?" she asked, her voice sharp, almost accusatory. "Gone," I said simply. Her face froze, her mask slipping for just a second before she quickly tried to recover. "What do you mean, gone? Who?" "Your friend," I said. "The one you asked to come here and set me up. She's not here because I told her to leave. And I played her the recording of your little plan. She knows everything." For a moment she said nothing. Her face went pale, her lips trembling slightly as the weight of the situation hit her. You're lying." I shook my head. "No, I'm not. I heard you on the phone, I found your book. And I saw the emails, I know everything, and I'm done pretending otherwise." She stumbled back slightly, gripping the edge of the doorframe as if she might collapse. Her confidence, her arrogance, it all evaporated in an instant. "You really thought I wouldn't find out," I continued, my voice steady but sharp. "You really thought I'd just fall into your trap and let you walk away with everything while I took the blame." Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her eyes welled with tears, not the kind born from regret, but from panic. The carefully constructed image she'd built for herself was starting to shatter, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I stood up and walked past her, leaving her standing frozen in the doorway. I didn't need to hear her excuses, her justifications, or her apologies. The damage was done, and there was no coming back from it. Behind me, she called out my name, her voice trembling and weak. But I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I had won the game she thought she was playing, and now she was left to pick up the pieces of her broken plan. The hours after the confrontation passed in a haze. I left the house, needing space, air, anything to escape the suffocating presence of her lies and the wreckage of what our marriage had become. The night air was sharp and cold, biting against my skin as I walked aimlessly through the streets. My mind was replaying every moment, every word, every detail of the past few days. I couldn't stop seeing her face when the truth unraveled, when her perfectly crafted plan crumbled in front of her. The shock, the fear, the raw panic, it was all etched into my memory. I didn't know how long I wandered, but by the time I returned home, the lights were still on, and she was sitting in the living room. Her face was pale, eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked up at me as I stepped inside, but I didn't meet her gaze. I couldn't. The sight of her filled me with a strange mixture of anger, pity, and exhaustion. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. I could feel her watching me, waiting for me to say something, anything, but I didn't. Instead, I walked past her and into the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, trying to process everything that had happened. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had plotted to destroy me, not just leave me, but ruin me completely. And for what? To justify her own guilt, to make herself feel better about her betrayal. She must have followed me because I heard her quiet footsteps approach. I felt her presence linger in the doorway, hesitant, unsure of herself for the first time in what felt like forever. Finally she spoke, her voice trembling and small. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, hollow and meaningless. Sorry didn't undo the lies. Sorry didn't erase the book, the emails, or the cold way she had planned to set me up. Sorry didn't fix the gaping wound she had left in my chest. I didn't respond. I couldn't trust anything she said, and even if I could, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear her excuses. After a few moments, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the darkened room. The next few days were a blur. We moved around each other like ghosts, barely speaking, barely making eye contact. The house felt cold, silent, and heavy with the weight of unspoken words. She tried, in her own way, to bridge the gap, small gestures, attempts at conversation, but it was all too little, too late. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room staring blankly at the TV, she sat down across from me. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were desperate. "Please, can we talk?" For a moment, I considered walking away, but something in her tone made me stay. I nodded, bracing myself for whatever she had to say. She started talking about how she felt trapped, about how she thought I didn't love her anymore, about how she made mistakes she couldn't take back. She tried to explain herself, to justify her choices, but every word felt like another slap in the face. Her reasoning didn't make sense to me. Nothing she said could justify what she had done, the betrayal, the plan, the way she had been so cold and calculated about it all. I let her talk, let her pour out everything she'd been holding inside, but when she was done, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no sympathy, just emptiness. Whatever love I had left for her had been buried under the weight of her deceit. After a long silence, I spoke. "You didn't just cheat on me, you tried to destroy me. You planned it step by step like it was some game. Do you even understand how sick that is?" She flinched at my words, tears streaming down her face, but I couldn't stop. "You didn't just make a mistake, you built a trap. You played with my life, with my dignity, and for what? So you could walk away guilt-free? So you could justify seeing someone else? I can't come back from this. We can't come back from this." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, but I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. There was nothing left to salvage. The damage was done, and no amount of tears or apologies could fix it. The next few weeks were filled with silence and slow decay. We didn't fight, we didn't yell, we just drifted further apart until the gap between us was too wide to cross. I started sleeping in the guest room, and eventually we began to talk about separation. When the day finally came for one of us to leave, it was her. She packed her things quietly, avoiding my eyes as she carried boxes out to her car. I watched from the window as she loaded the last of her belongings and drove away without looking back. The house felt unbearably empty after she was gone, but there was also a strange sense of relief. The weight of her lies, her manipulation, and her betrayal had finally been lifted. It wasn't freedom, it wasn't happiness, but it was something. In the weeks that followed, I tried to piece myself back together. Some days were easier than others, but the wounds she left weren't the kind that healed quickly. Trust felt like a foreign concept, and the idea of loving someone again felt impossible. But slowly, life began to move forward. I focused on myself, on the small things that brought me peace: walking, reading, even just sitting in silence without the shadow of her betrayal looming over me. One day I stumbled across that book again, the one I had found in her closet. I stared at it for a long time before finally tossing it into the trash. It didn't deserve to exist in my home anymore. Looking back, I realized something important: her betrayal wasn't a reflection of me. It wasn't about my worth, my love, or my actions. It was about her choices, her flaws, and her inability to confront her own mistakes. She had tried to turn me into a doormat, to crush me under the weight of her scheme, but in the end, she had only destroyed herself. And now she was the one left picking up the pieces of her shattered life, while I slowly, painfully was learning how to rebuild mine.